Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters. This is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, John Bonifaz, who is the co-founder and president of Free Speech for People, who previously served as executive director and general counsel of the National Voting Rights Institute and as the legal director of Voter Action, a distinguished attorney who has been at the forefront of key voting rights battles across the country for more than 2 decades and is the winner of the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship Award. He's the co-author of The Constitution Demands It, The Case for the Impeachment of Donald Trump. Welcome to Background Briefing, John Bonifaz.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And your organization, Free Speech for People, along with a group of constitutional lawyers, have been contacting election officials in all 50 states to remind them about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which bars formerly elected officials who engaged in an insurrection from again holding public office. Now, we've had the first day of testimony from the Select Committee on the investigating the insurrection. So what is the line there, John, in terms of who could be found guilty or at least be stripped of their congressional seats under the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? What's the bar?
Well, so first we should address the fact that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which of course was part of the 14th Amendment enacted after the Civil War, was designed to address the Confederates seeking to continue to hold public office or seek other public office after having engaged in insurrection. And there was a decision made to include language in the 14th Amendment that would bar them from ever holding future public office. Several years after the enactment of the 14th Amendment, the Congress unfortunately granted amnesty to all those Confederates and effectively undermined the very purpose of that section, but it only applied to the Confederates and did not apply going forward to those who might take an oath of office and then engage in insurrection. The other point I'd make is that the language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment not only covers those who have taken an oath of office and then engaged in insurrection, but who have given aid or comfort to insurrectionists. And so what we do know is that former President Donald Trump incited this insurrection. The facts make that very clear. And he is covered by having taken an oath of office and engaged in insurrection. But we also know there were many others who gave aid or comfort to the insurrection, including those in Congress who fomented the big lie. And after this insurrection took place, they went back into the Congress and they sought to overturn the election results from November 2020. So there are unfortunately many elected officials who took that oath of office and then gave aid or comfort to the insurrection. The final category are those who actually participated in going into the Capitol during that insurrection, who were elected officials and who had taken an oath of office at the state or local level. They too are covered by this constitutional provision.
So, for example, what was it, about 134 House members voted against the certification of the election, even after the storming of the Capitol? Are all of those people liable?
Well, I think secretaries of state and chief election officials ought to make that decision when they seek to be placed on the ballot. Again, were they giving aid or comfort to the insurrectionists? I think there's a very strong argument that they were, that what they were doing after this violence had occurred, after this seditious attack on the U.S. Capitol had occurred, that they went back into the House chamber and they went ahead and endorsed that insurrection, gave aid or comfort to it by voting to overturn the election results. It's worth noting that members of the Senate, after the insurrection, some of them, chose not to continue that effort to overturn the election results. So I do think that this needs to be determined by secretaries of state and chief election officials. They have a duty to follow the mandate of the Constitution and determine who is qualified and who is not. And we know if you're running for president of the United States, you have to be 35 years of age by the time you take the oath of office for the presidency. You have to be a naturalized citizen. You have to be living in the country for 14 years at least. And you have to not have taken an oath of office and then turned around and incited an insurrection. That we know.
And again, I'm speaking with John Bonifaz, who's the co-founder and president of Free Speech for People, who previously served as executive director and general counsel of the National Voting Rights Institute and as a legal director of Voter Action. A distinguished attorney, he has been at the forefront of key voting rights battles across the country for more than 2 decades and is the winner of a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship Award. And he is the co-author of The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump. So what about people like Senator Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, who actually, on the floor of the Senate, just before it was overrun by the insurgents, tried to stop the certification, as did Jim Jordan from the House, tried to stop the certification of the Arizona vote? They would seem to be even more liable, aren't they?
Well, they're certainly liable. I wouldn't put them as having greater liability than Donald Trump, but they're certainly liable as well. Look, the reality here is that this insurrection was instigated by Donald Trump and his associates and their fomenting of this big lie that in fact the election in November 2020 was fraudulent. That was a lie that was repeatedly told by them and others, and that led to thousands of people coming to the Capitol on January 6th, storming the Capitol with this violent, seditious attack. So when we speak about accountability, and it's important that this House Select Committee has gotten underway, part of that accountability includes whether we allow these insurrectionists and those who aided and gave comfort to these insurrectionists to ever hold public office again. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment makes clear that they cannot.
So not long after that vote was taken that we mentioned, where I think it was 135 Republicans in the House, even though they saw how close they came, their lives were at risk, how they were hunkered down and protected by a very thin blue line of Capitol Police, and many of them were terrified, and some were justifiably terrified, since people like AOC and Nancy Pelosi, the crowd were calling for their execution along with hanging Mike Pence. So it was a very serious matter, but very shortly thereafter, again, I'm not sure the exact figure, but I think it was 134 Republicans in the House voted against the certification of Biden's victory. Shortly thereafter, Representative Cori Bush offered up a resolution directing the Committee on Ethics to investigate. And she wanted those committees to issue a report on whether any or all of the actions taken by members of the 117th Congress who sought to overturn the 2020 presidential election violated their oath of office to uphold the Constitution or the rules of the House of Representatives, and that they should face sanctions, including removal from the House of Representatives. So what happened to that resolution? Because it seems to be so incredibly clear that you can't belong to a body that you basically have joined those who wanted to destroy that body. You've chosen the side of those insurrectionists who assaulted your house instead of those who defended it.
Well, first I should say that Congresswoman Bush is to be congratulated for issuing that resolution so soon after the insurrection. We were one of many groups that issued a sign-on letter in support of the resolution. It remains pending, and it needs to be taken up by the House. We fully agree with what she presented to the House. Anyone who sought to give aid and comfort to this insurrection, who voted to overturn the legitimate results of the November 2020 election, does not deserve to remain in Congress. They effectively went against their oath of office, which is to uphold and defend the Constitution. That includes defending the right to vote. And instead, they sought to trample on the right to vote of millions of Americans by seeking to overturn the election November 2020, which, again, there was no evidence whatsoever of any fraud. This was a legitimate election with the legitimate results reported. and Joe Biden is a legitimately elected president of the United States. And yet they fomented this big lie and they sought to overturn those legitimate results. They do not deserve to maintain their office in the House of Representatives.
So do you think that they're doing it because they genuinely believe that Joe Biden wasn't democratically elected and didn't win a majority of 7 million more popular votes than Trump? And he also won, of course, in the Electoral College. Are they doing it because they genuinely don't believe it, or they're doing it because it is a very cynical tactic to undermine the ability of this Biden administration and the Democrats to get anything done? And that seems to be a pattern in the destructive politics in our divided country, that, we know that McConnell and others, Gingrich and company, met on the very day of Obama's inauguration and plotted his downfall. And McConnell said he was determined to make him a one-term president. And more recently, McConnell said that he's 100% focused on stopping the Biden administration. So is this the politics of sabotage to delegitimize the Democrats? Or do these people genuinely believe, without evidence, I might add, that Trump somehow won?
I actually do believe that it's more of a strategy to effectively defy what the people have expressed at the ballot box and to try to undermine this Biden administration. But I would go further and say they're doing it because they fear Donald Trump. They fear the primary challengers that they might face from the seditious right-wing, further right-wing aspects of the Republican Party, who would run against them and effectively unseat them because they are more aligned with Donald Trump than the person who perhaps voted to uphold this legitimate election. So, and certify the election results. So I think it's a combination. But there is a lot of fear among those members of Congress that if they cross Donald Trump, they will face their own primary challengers.
So just in closing then, John Bonifaz, given that Trump is sort of terrorizing them and maybe they're falling in line because they don't want to be primaried, nevertheless, it seems across the board, given how many Republican state legislatures are passing these voter suppression laws, and the Republicans essentially have got it so sewn up in terms of voter suppression that they will win the House before one vote is cast through gerrymandering. On election day, they will win because of the many levels of voter suppression that they put into the laws and made it so difficult for Democrats to vote. And then once the votes are cast, through these partisan Republican legislatures, they get to count and certify the vote. And then if they don't like the vote, they can change the results. And then on top of that, they've also been harassing neutral poll workers. A recent poll had 50% of poll workers saying they feel threatened in this country. And a lot of those people are resigning and quitting and being replaced by the kind of partisan Republicans we see in Arizona doing that bogus cyber ninjas recount. So the bottom line, it seems to me, John, is that the Republicans have made the Trump Republicans, I should say, have made a collective decision that they can't win the next election fairly, so they'd rather cheat than compete.
Well, I think there's definitely a lot to what you're saying there. And the fact is that this is a direct attack on the right to vote in our democracy, all these voter suppression laws, and it is a strategy. It's not a coincidence that we're seeing so many states with so many voter suppression bills and many of them now getting enacted. It is designed certainly to limit who can vote and that those who are being limited very much lean Democratic, traditionally disenfranchised communities, communities of color, the young people voting. And this is, I think, a crisis for our democracy right now. And what needs to happen as a result of this crisis, in the face of it, is that we need leadership, not only from the Senate Democrats, who have the ability to move forward key legislation, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, to effectively overturn these state voter suppression bills. But we need this leadership from the president himself, President Joe Biden. You know, the filibuster former President Barack Obama has called a Jim Crow relic, and that it is. It has been used time and time again to block key civil rights and voting rights legislation, and it must come to an end. It must be abolished, and the path must be cleared for the For the People Act and the John Lewis Advancement Act to get passed out of Congress. And President Biden has yet to call for an end to the filibuster, as his predecessor, President Obama, has done. And I think it's time that he do so and use the power of the presidency to ensure that our democracy is preserved.
Well, John Bonifaz, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you.